So as the gardening season is coming to an end and it is freezing cold outside, and I'm sure most of you guys are taking great fun in planting your garden for next year. And so when you are planting a garden, of course you have to think about spacing, about light, but a big thing that you also have to think about is companion planting. Now, what is companion planting? So companion planting is exactly what it sounds like. It is planting certain plants next to each other so that they might benefit from each other and do better in the overall season. So what are the ways that they benefit each other? Well, depending on the plant, there are several ways that different plants can benefit each other. So it could be something like putting more nutrients in the soil, or it could be keeping certain pests away, it could be keeping certain bugs away, repelling. Sorry, there was an airplane. But it could be keeping certain bugs away, keeping certain pests away, keeping the soil healthy, and keeping a large microbiome in the soil. There is a bunch of reasons to companion plant. It also just helps maximize the space a little bit of a garden. If your garden is like mine, we're expanding it, but we still don't have as much space as we would like to plant everything in the garden. And so you could have something like the Three Sisters garden, where you have corn at the very top, and then you have some sort of squash or melon, not traditionally melon, but you can use it as a mulch, and then you have beans climbing up the corn. That is a great example of historical companion planting. It really goes back that far. So now that I've talked about it some, what is like the best thing to companion plant? And I, just from personal experience, from doing my research, overall, the best thing that you can use to companion plant is a marigold. Literally, those little orange flowers that you see everywhere, that's a marigold, or marigold. And those are literally the best companion plant for literally everything. So my favorite way to use them is to plant them next to my tomatoes. Last year I did not plant them next to my tomatoes, and my tomatoes were taken down by hornworms probably within the first month and a half of the gardening season starting. That sucked. So this year I looked into it more and I planted marigolds right next to my tomatoes, like literally like tomato marigold, real close to it. And I took off 3 hornworms the entire gardening season. 3! That I was so shocked that it worked that well. And it's because marigolds have that strong smell to them. Animals and bugs hate it. And so I used it for tomatoes to get rid of my hornworm problem. But you can also use it for pretty much any other plant that gets aphids or other pests like that. It really does a great job at deterring because of its such strong smell. It also does a great job at deterring animals for the same exact reason, and it has a very strong smell. So when you're gardening, you will find that yes, marigolds do a great job, but anything that has a very strong scent to it will also do a great job of repelling most pests. And so things like mint and lavender and stuff that just, we find them very nice smells, but animals don't. Those are great to use as companion plants because it'll keep all the pests, all the animals. I don't want to promise all of them, but it'll keep a lot of the pested animals off of your plants. Another thing that marigolds are great for is attracting pollinators. It is a bright flower, which is important when you want to attract pollinators. Lots of color, lots of brightness, and it also has a very strong smell, which are basically the 2 main things that you need for a pollinator. That's why marigolds really tend to be my save-all flower. They deter the pests that we don't want, the animals, the bugs, but they also attract the butterflies, the moths, everything that you need for a garden. And that's why I plant them everywhere. Now, marigolds are a great kind of cover-all plant. You can plant them all over your garden and they will be beneficial wherever they go. But there are other plants that you can plant that might not be great all over the garden, but will definitely be beneficial for certain plants. For instance, a lot of people say that planting your basil next to your tomatoes repels the pests from the tomatoes and makes the basil taste better. Now, I did plant my basil next to my tomatoes this year. I don't know if it made the basil taste better. Maybe it did. But I do know that once again, my tomatoes had 3 hornworms on them this whole year, and that is with 12 like big tomatoes, like indeterminate tomatoes. I had 12 indeterminate tomatoes, and on all of them, 3 hornworms. Very proud of that. Another one that a lot of people tend to go for is planting your cucumbers next to dill. You know, they're right next to each other, so you can pick them and go pickle them in the kitchen, but also dill does help to detract certain pests that come onto the cucumbers. And so there are cucumber beetles, there are squash bugs. Where I'm at, we have a huge squash bug problem. Like, I cannot plant squash in the summer and let it live. It will die within a couple of weeks. So I don't know how well I can really vouch for the idea that dill helps repel squash bugs. But that's what a lot of different resources say. So it's something to give a shot if you have that issue. Another one for the basics that can kind of go all over your garden is garlic and onions, or, you know, chives, or anything that has that really strong kind of, I don't want to say bitter, but like oniony smell. Any plants that have that oniony smell to them do a great job at repelling some bugs, but also many animals. Animals do not like that strong smell of onions, garlic, whatever. And so what I have done this year is I have way back over in my, like, closest to the fence beds, I have planted a row of garlic. And then I have my cold weather crops there. So I have my cabbage and my kale. And it's so funny because I have my cabbage completely surrounded by garlic that has now sprouted out of the ground, and kale that was only covered on like half sides, like the right side and the back side was not covered. Well, I come out here the other morning, kale is ripped out of the ground. There's a hole where it was. Cabbage is fine. I put the kale back in the ground. A couple days later, kale once again ripped out of the ground. Cabbage is fine. At this point, we just have a stem of the kale. It's back in the ground. It's growing, I guess. I don't know. Cabbage is still there. Cabbage is fine. There's no bite marks taken out of the cabbage. The deer have not gotten to it. And I fully believe that reason is because it is completely surrounded by garlic, which is kind of crazy. But if it works, you know. We also had a bed in our like front yard for a little while that we could not grow anything in. The animals would just get to it. We have a lot of deer, raccoons, possums, squirrels, rabbits. Like, literally everything is on our property. And so we couldn't grow it. Like, they would just eat everything like that. Like, it wouldn't even get time to grow. So what we did was plant a border of onions. Like, just start little, like, onion sprouts, put them in there, and let them grow. Some of them at a young age don't put off that pungent smell, and so the animals did end up eating them. However, when they got a little bit bigger, they did smell, and so the animals started to stay away, and we got to harvest a couple of carrots from that bed. The soil wasn't great because I never thought to fix it. So they were tiny carrots, but they were still carrots that had not been taken out, and I was very pleased with that. And I fully believe that that's because we planted a border of onions around. And the same will go with garlic. If you plant a border of garlic or onions on your garden, the odds of an animal coming in to eat from said garden are much lower than if you just, you know, let it sit there. Now, when thinking about the major plants that you're going to plant in your garden, we've talked about cucumbers, we've talked about tomatoes, and we've talked about like onions and the kind of that family. So peppers, talking about peppers for companion planting. I personally, where I'm at, I have not had a lot of issues with pests coming and eating my peppers. I've had a few deer come and eat the leaves of my hot peppers, but they always leave the fruit alone. They always know that that's spicy for some reason. But the biggest issue that I've had with peppers is aphids. And so, going back to the cure-all, marigolds. I will come back to marigolds every single time. I have a lot of grow bags with peppers in them, and then sometimes I'll have them out in the beds, and every single time I will have either a marigold by the grow bag or literally in it, like in the bag with the peppers, or in the bed right next to the peppers, and that will basically detract all aphids. I also have this problem when planting beans. My beans this last year, I didn't plant enough marigolds by them, and they got aphids really bad. And it was towards the end of the season, so I just didn't mess with it. But if it was closer to like the summer, like peak season, I would have hosed them down really well. And aphids aren't strong enough to get back up on the plant. So if you hose them down and just stay consistent about it for a few days, your plants will be fine. But it's nice to not have to do that. It's nice to just plant marigolds once and then the whole season your plants are protected. This is kind of the basics of companion planting, all the way from marigolds that are kind of the cure-all for the garden to each of the plants that I love growing and I know that you guys love growing, kind of the basics of, you know, cucumber, tomato, pepper, and then what onions and garlic are best used for in the garden. And so I hope that this helped give you some ideas as you're planning your garden for next year. And if you learned something from this video, please remember to leave it a like and subscribe, and feel free to ask any questions, or if you have any comments, feel free to leave them down below. I will answer every single one of them. Until next time, happy gardening!